Hi guys, this is a Psyker build. It's gonna be mostly a boss killer build with a little bit of AoE clear. So let's quickly look at the Psyker powers and show you what I'm using. I'm using Molten Beam, which is a channeled effect, single target, and I have stuck on the phase through, which adds armor piercing, extra critical chance by 10%, and skill effectiveness, which just basically increases the damage. The skill does more damage while holding the button down. It increases by 40% per second, maximum 120%. Other ability I'm using is Levitate, just for movement speed. I don't like the teleport skills. I prefer to just move faster and see exactly where I'm moving. Fiery Form, I basically use this if I'm doing a purge mission or if while I'm targeting a boss or a captain and a lot of little Nurgle spawn, or those servitors with the rocket launchers. They basically, when they come in melee range, Fiery Form will kill them. That has increased skill duration, reduced cooldown, and decreased warp heat, because this is a minimum warp heat build. You want as little warp heat generated as possible. The next ability I've got is Inferno, which is just the exact same. Reduced cooldown, increased duration, and decreased warp heat. Basically, this slot is completely optional. You can swap that in for anything you want. Say you wanted to take, endurance to get a little bit more survivability. That is purely optional. I just use it for a little bit of help of clearing what I'm doing, really. Say I'm fighting a boss or the room's pretty heavily high density, I would pop Fiery Form, Inferno, and then I would use the two abilities from my equipped weapon to reduce the warp heat, and then I would go to town with the Molten Beam. That's the spells that I basically use. Take a look at the perks. I am using Warp Heat Diffusion. Each time you create a debuff effect, you will -1 warp heat. The Molten Beam, every second channeled, it's going to be creating an armor debuff, reduced armor on the target, so that's why I take that, and it just decreases your heat while you're attacking. It's reducing heat. This is what gives me a huge amount of damage. I basically have 100% damage, it's 0 warp heat, and the damage is reduced the higher warp heat you have, so you want to weave in your force rod or your warp rod's attacks basically to reduce the heat if you are using any other skills apart from the Molten Beam. I've took Eternal Warrior basically just to have an instant resurrection. It's a cheat death. It's a safety precaution basically. That could be swapped out for, I would probably take Cull of the Week at level 47, which is 50% against enemies affected by debuffs. Basically, the Molten Beam debuffs enemies, so that's basically, you're getting a free 50% flat damage. Other perks I could possibly take would be Mind Fortress, which is here. 3% damage reduction per second while standing still, up to 15% maximum. Basically, when you're channeling Molten Beam, you cannot move, you cannot kite stuff, you have to stand ground and fight, so that could be a decent talent. The other one I would take is Survival Instinct, which is plus 10% crit strength with a -3% damage reduction, which if you're killing fast enough, you're not really going to need that damage reduction. I've then also put most of my points into Psi Focus, just because of the 0+5 crit strength every time and the maximum warp heat, because the more warp heat I have, the more it's going to take to generate to lose that damage percentage buff from retrograde Psychic Dominion. Inventory, the main thing you want to worry about is you want warp bound armor, a psychic focus, just for those extra skill slots for the psychic abilities. You can use a force rod. I like using the force rod because this ability here is a single target and it deals a decent amount of damage with a dot, so if this ability, the Witchfire or whatever ability you are using. Like, I tried Warp Blast, and it seems that I need to hit them like a couple of times for it to kill them if I haven't finished them off, whereas the Firebolt just seems to do that extra bit of damage, which is just needed to finish them off. Skills. The first thing I took was Field Surgery. That's basically because I'm standing still, I'm vulnerable early on, so having that inoculate a reset to 0 if I do get into a sticky situation is fantastic. Later on in the build, when you get to max level, I'm only level 30 right now, I would be putting all the rest of the points into this tree. I would want as much survivability as possible to just stand my ground and melt things with that beam. From support, I took Invigorating Faith, which every point of warp heat gained heals you for 0.5% of your maximum HP. Even though this is a low warp heat build, when you do pop your fiery form for that damage reduction and extra damage, it will generate warp heat, it's a free heal, regardless. Debuffs, I went into Castigation, which gives me 3% critical hit chance for every debuff on the target. I'm pretty sure that stacks for enemies, like when you're in a party and enemies are debuffed from other means, like when they're slowed and whatnot. So 3% crit. I mean, I'm already debuffing the targets with slows as well, so, and armor piercing. So right here, I grant 50% suppression damage to armor breaking, armor piercing, and shield piercing attacks. We have the armor piercing tag on the Molten Beam, so we also took the 3, 6, 9, 12% extra damage here. You'll be surprised how much damage this does to when you're fighting a Lehman Russ or even turrets or the Chaos Marines that are heavily armored. It basically just ignores armor and melts them. So much damage. I found that without having armor piercing, if I was against flesh targets like Nurgles and normal Psykers, I could destroy them, but when I came against armored targets, I was standing for days trying to burn them down, so I took the armor piercing and it just melts. You'll see in the gameplay video right after the build. I went into critical and I took Feeding on Pain, -1 warp heat for every critical hit dealt. The amount of crits this beam does is insane, so you're just reducing the heat as much as possible, and that's also keeping your damage up from the perk. Took Berserker Rage, where every crit heals me for 1% HP. As I say, this beam, you will see in the video, the crits it does is just crit. It rarely never crits. I took No Remorse, which is a +5% crit. And you want to fill this tree out when you get more skill points, when you get beyond level 30. So the rest of the skill points would be put into the crit to get the 10% bonus damage up to 100% when a critical hit results in a kill. As I say, it's such a high chance that a crit is going to kill the enemy with this beam, so that's just going to stack and probably stay stacked. Psychic Combat, you want Exploit Weakness to get the extra 10% crit on that beam. The Psychic Debuff, that's the armor piercing. This is what gives your Psyker ability, the armor piercing. I then took single DPS because it's a single target skill, the Molten Beam, and I really just went for this, which is 10% damage and suppression damage bonus versus enemies below 30% HP. It's kind of like when the enemy gets below 30%, it puts them in an execute phase, and they just melt. They seriously melt so hard. Other point I have here, which is Warp Adaptation. Ignore that. The point, and I have that written down on the spreadsheet, will actually go into Harvest Ritual, which I don't have this unlocked yet. Yes, you can put a point here, but until you have until you have this 250 Radical, it doesn't actually unlock the skill. So it's just a bug in game that you can put points in here, but they won't actually activate. But anyways, when I do get that unlocked and put a point into here, each killed enemy creates a Harvested Soul bonus. It stacks 10 times. That gives me plus 10% critical hit strength. So I will in theory have 100% critical hit strength Even though a successful crit hit removes all instances of harvested soul, it will just keep stacking, and it'll just do so much damage. So that's basically build. It's pretty simple, as you'll see in the gameplay. I rarely use my weapon attacks unless I've used my psychic powers, the Inferno or the Fiery Form, and then I'll just use Fiery Bolt or Warp Blast to reduce the heat, and then just Molten Beam. You just basically channel this beam, but with the addition of Armor Piercing, it just tears through bosses. With it doesn't have huge AoE, like you can't AoE huge groups. You can AoE down like the basic normal targets to medium targets, but your main focus with this build, if you're playing co-op or solo, will be assassinations, and you will just use your levitation and just get to the target as fast as possible, beam them down, and then move on to the next one. And in groups, it's a fantastic boss killer. That's what it's built for. So I really hope you enjoy the video. I'm going to add some gameplay on, and let me know what you think. If you want, I mean, there's loads of builds out here, so if you want any more videos, this was requested from someone from the Cabal, so have a good day. If you're interested in anything else, just drop a comment, like, subscribe, share. I appreciate it, and hope everyone's enjoying the game and getting ready for the event tonight, Friday night. Let's do it.